Let me explain what I have in mind. I propose that we meet here, most days, to talk for an hour or two.
Talk?
Yes, just talk. See if we can identify what's troubling you. So as to distract you as little as possible, I'm going to sit there, behind you. I'm going to ask you to try not to turn around and look at me under any circumstances. Now. Have you any idea what may have brought on these attacks you suffer from?
Humiliation and any kind of humiliation. I can't bear to see it, and it makes me feel nauseated. I start pouring with sweat, cold sweat. My father lost his temper all the time. He was always angry with.
When you stopped talking just now, did a thought come into your head?
I don't know.
Or an image, perhaps? Was it an image?
Yes.
What was the image?
It was a hand. My father's hand.
Why do you think you saw that?
Whenever he hit us, afterwards we had to kiss his hand.
Looks a bit over the top, doesn't it? The stuttering, the strange awkward poses, the jolts, the tics, and all of that. Poor Keira Knightley really seems to annoy people. And I know when the movie A Dangerous Method came out, a lot of people put it down to overacting. But look at these images, drawn from Jean-Martin Jarcot's roster of celebrated female hysterics. The different attitudes demonstrated in the grand hysterias that he appeared to be able to elicit from his girls. Similar, isn't it? What we see in A Dangerous Method is a faithful depiction of what hysteria looked like and how it was elicited, I use that word advisedly, by the Charcots, Freuds and Jungs of the late 19th century psych world. This is a story about gender. Hysteria was, as a disease category, almost exclusively associated with women from the time of Hippocrates through to the late Victorian period. Hippocrates and Galen conceptualised it as being a result of a wandering womb, a condition that afflicted sexless spinsters and virgins. As we've seen, physicians like Johann Weyer resisted the diagnosis of witchcraft or possession in favour of a bodily problem. The humoral system was able to incorporate it within its notions of fluid imbalances specific to women. And then the 18th century, the era of sensibility, when the malfunctioning of the nervous system was really coming into its own as an exciting cause for many illnesses. The notion that the overly refined and cultured female upper-class nervous system could easily tip into hysteria if stimulated in the wrong way gained an enormous amount of medical popularity. This might involve over-education, or it might involve over-sex. In general, by the 19th century, the new biology had developed a scientific rationale for sexual difference that perceived women's diseases to be a function of their role as the weaker gender, whose nervous systems were fit only for mothering and domesticity. By the time that Charcot had risen to preeminence as the Napoleon of neuroses, biology had reconfigured hysteria. On the one hand, the older ideas of sensibility remained, but with a twist that relied upon the increased knowledge of the structure and function of the nerves. and continued to insist as well that the deleterious effects of modern civilization overburdened refined nervous systems. And yet, on the other hand, we see ideas of degeneration taking root and becoming ever more powerful. Charcot, a man of humble origins, was an extraordinarily brilliant pathological clinician. In other words, he was adept at finding the pathological roots of specific diseases. Using the methods originally pioneered in the mid to late 18th century, he would follow patients through their illnesses, tracking their symptoms, and then upon death undertaking post-mortems that identified lesions that were unique to a particular disease. In this way, he was able to track down a number of neurological conditions, some of which were within the purview of alienists, others not. These included locomotor ataxia, Tourette's syndrome. He also differentiated Parkinson's disease from multiple sclerosis. He had a brilliant track record in finding the origins of neurological conditions. As Skull says, if Charcot diagnosed the patient's disorder, the matter was settled, and it was the vast reservoir of authority he derived from his expertise in these dismal diseases of the nervous system that gave him the license to pronounce and pontificate on the puzzles of hysteria mysteria, and to assert that here was another in the array of largely incurable diseases of the nervous system. Charcot believed, therefore, that hysteria was a neurological condition. In other words, somewhere in the nervous system, lesions would be found that correlated perfectly with the symptoms of hysteria. The problem was that he was completely and utterly unable at post-mortem to find the lesions in question. This, however, did not stop him or his research in this area. With his role of physician at the Salpêtrière Hospital, that vast Parisian reservoir of female madness, he collected a coterie of hysterics who he displayed every Tuesday at his famous Leçons du Mardi à la Salpêtrière. Charcot's hysterics and their performances became the stuff of legend. A biopic has even been made recently of Augustine. But there were many others in the coterie whose hysteria was placed on display every Tuesday when, using hypnotism, Charcot would bring forth the highly eroticized hysterical behaviour of his subjects by putting them in a trance. This was done in one of two ways. Firstly, he believed that there was a zone of the body highly connected with the nervous system that could be pressured and would trigger a hysterical reaction. Secondly, and more famously, he used hypnotism, as I've just said, to place the women into a hysterical trance and take the observers through the different stages of hysteria, culminating in a display of grande hystérie. Charcot, however, unlike many of his successors, believed that hypnotism was not in any way, shape or form therapeutic. Rather, it was a method of diagnosing and exploring hysterical conditions. In fact, he only believed that hysterical individuals were susceptible to hypnotism. At the root of this belief lay the theory of degeneration that was at the heart of a lot of 19th century thinking about inherited disease and deviance. For Charcot believed that hysteria was the combination of two things. Firstly, a trauma that brought on the initial symptoms, but secondly, a degenerated nervous system that made the individual susceptible to hysteria. When we talk about degeneration, we often think about the ideas of Darwin and the way that Galton developed eugenics from them. But in reality, the idea was older, and in France it was Morel who influenced the biomedical field. Both Morel and Galton believed that civilization had robbed nature of its power to weed out individuals who should not have survived. In other words, while survival of the fittest was the way that nature functioned, red in tooth and claw, in human civilization, doctors, hospitals, poor laws, charities and whatnot had prevented the weak from going to the wall. Whether the theory was influenced by Lamarck or by Darwin, the upshot was that the human race was under threat of degenerating. Individuals with weakened nervous systems were surviving and propagating their condition, creating circumstances where hysteria and other mental maladies, like epilepsy and feeble-mindedness, threatened to overrun humanity. Perhaps the strongest expression of this biological point of view can be found in the work of Cesare Lombroso, whose L'uomo delinquente, criminal man, did so much to make deviance biological, to create, among other things, the criminal brain. It was also these concerns that influenced those individuals we examined at the end of the previous lecture, the Ferriers, Hewlings-Jacksons and Maudsleys of the world. The neurologists who did so much to harden biological thinking around neurological and psychiatric problems. For they were men who believed that all diseases of the mind were in reality diseases of the brain or the nervous system. In the next module, we're going to see how this played out in two different ways. On the one hand, the development of Kreplin's new nosology of psychiatry. On the other, Freud's theory of the Darwinian mind and the problems that occurred when it failed, for whatever reason, to develop and adapt to the mores of contemporary civilization. But a coda before we go. We talked about hysteria here as being explicitly gendered, a female condition. As we'll see, Charcot began to discover that it was not, that men too suffered from hysteria, displaying the same florid and animated symptoms. This will take us to the First World War and beyond, when we explore the world of shell shock.